Hello there. Welcome to Lena's Lane. In this episode of Case Files, I'll be sharing with you the case of the Groveland Four, so make sure you stay tuned for more. On July 16, 1949, in Groveland, Lake County, Florida, four black males were accused of sexually assaulting a 17-year-old white farm girl by the name of Norma Pageant and physically attacking her husband, Willie Pageant. 16-year-old Charles Greenlee was born June 4, 1933 in Florida. He was the son of Thomas and Emma Greenlee. His family was living in Columbia County when he was 2, but they had moved to Baker County by the time Charles was 12. In 1935, his father worked in turpentine manufacturing and later likely also in the timber industry. In 1945, Charles and his 4 siblings were all attending school, and in July 1949, Charles had gone to Groveland looking for work, being that he was married and he and his wife were expecting their first child. 16-year-old Ernest Thomas was born in Florida. He was also married and living and working near Groveland, Florida. He had encouraged Charles to come to Groveland due to the jobs related to the citrus groves. 22-year-old Samuel Shepard was born April 7, 1927, in Fitzgerald, Georgia. He was the son of Henry and Charlie Shepard. His father worked in the lumber industry. The Shepard family moved to Groveland, Florida, where his father achieved ownership of his own farm by clearing and developing former swampland. When Samuel registered for the draft in 1945, he was described as 5'8", 149 pounds with a light brown complexion, brown eyes, and black hair. Samuel and Walter Irvin were friends and fellow veterans after World War II. 22-year-old Walter Irvin was born May 8, 1927 in Gainesville, Florida. He was living in Groveland when he registered for the draft in May 1945. He was working at the time for Apshawa Groves. When he registered for the draft, he was recorded as 5'3", weighing 105 pounds, light brown, with brown eyes and black hair. He served in the Army, leaving with the rank of private. After returning to Groveland, following their military service, Samuel and Walter both continued to wear their uniforms. They were proud of their service, which some of the local whites resented. Sheriff Willis McCall was known for supporting segregation and keeping a strong hold on workers and against union organizing. He was part of ensuring there was a ready supply of low-wage workers to man the orange groves. Samuel could work with his father, and Walter was determined to find an alternative to the orange groves. In the early hours on July 16, 1949, in the small town of Groveland, Florida, a town 30 miles west of Orlando, Norma reported to the police that she and her husband were on their way home from a dance. Their car stalled and 4 black men stopped and offered to help. The men allegedly robbed, assaulted, and left Willie on the side of the road, then abducted Norma. There was no accusations of sexual assault. Willie claimed the men drove a late model Mercury with Lake County license plates, but he could not make out the number because a handkerchief partially covered the tag. Within an hour of the accusations, Sheriff McCall put together a posse. The angry mob marched into black neighborhoods, burning down homes and threatening residents. Samuel and Walter were arrested first. The 22-year-old World War II vets were transported in a patrol car to a secluded spot and ordered out of the car. Both men were beaten by the police with blackjacks and fists, kicked as they lay on the ground, while being asked if they picked up a white girl. Deputy Yates then took them to the scene of the alleged crime and grew frustrated that their shoes didn't match any of the footprints left behind. The police then transported the men to Tavares Jail, handcuffed them to pipes in the basement, and continued to beat them in an effort to force them to confess. Charles was arrested shortly after. He admitted to knowing Ernest, who was helping him find a job, but was adamant that he had never met Samuel and Walter. Charles was waiting at a rail depot to meet Ernest when he was arrested and brought to the police station under suspicion. Police also beat Charles, who eventually admitted to sexually assaulting Norma, but only so the beatings would stop. Walter, Samuel, and Charles were arrested for the crimes, and Ernest remained on the run. On July 26, 1949, when Ernest became aware of what was happening, he fled. A posse of 1,000 violent white men, led by McCall, tracked him down a week later. Police found his location as they found a letter in his lockbox addressed to his wife. The posse found him asleep under a tree in the swamp and proceeded to shoot him more than 400 times. Officers reported that Thomas was armed and allegedly reached for a weapon. 2 days after being murdered by a mob, a coroner's jury ruled that Ernest's death was a justifiable homicide. As word spread about the arrest of the three, a crowd gathered at the jail. An estimated 200 cars carrying 500 to 600 men demanded that McCall turn the three men over to them for their brand of instant justice. It is reported that McCall had hidden the suspects in a nearby orange grove, but told the mob they had been transferred to the state prison. Norma, Willie, and Norma's father were allowed to search the jail. They told the mob the prisoners were gone, and McCall promised that he would see that justice was done and urged them to let the law handle this calmly. The members of the mob rejected McCall's advice. The mob of men drove to Groveland in a caravan, and once they arrived, they began shooting into black homes and setting them on fire. But local blacks apparently had been warned of the approaching caravan and fled. The mob set up blockades on the highway going into Groveland and waited for unsuspecting blacks. The NAACP and local blacks requested help from Governor Fuller Warren. The governor sent in the National Guard to Orlando. Over the next 6 days, the Guard gradually restored order. Unfortunately, a number of black-owned homes had already suffered damage. On August 11th, during the trial, police claimed the men in custody had confessed. The men would later say they were beaten into confessing, and they had physical wounds to prove it. They also had alibis. Charles was in Lake County Jail at the time of the alleged assault. Samuel and Walter claimed to have been at a nightclub in Alamonte Springs. Although medical evidence did not show signs of Norma being sexually assaulted, an all-white jury found the three men guilty. Samuel and Walter received the death penalty, while Charles received life in prison due to him only being 16 at the time of the alleged crime. Sometime later, the president of the Orlando NAACP asked the national office for help. An NAACP attorney, Franklin Williams, agreed to come. Williams gathered information that showed the evidence was highly questionable. When Williams met with the three suspects, he found their bodies covered with cuts and bruises, the results of beating administered by deputies to obtain confessions. The three told Williams that they were clubbed and had been hung from pipes with their feet touching broken glass. Williams had doubts whether the assaults had even taken place. Although Norma claimed to have been sexually assaulted and kidnapped, a white restaurant owner who gave her a ride after the alleged assault said she did not appear upset and did not mention the attack. Also, she did not claim to have been sexually assaulted until after talking with her husband. Williams suspected that Willie Pageant had beaten his wife, and the two wanted to hide the truth from her parents, who had warned him against hitting their daughter. Now, a little about Norma and Willie Pageant. Willie Pageant's family owned land beside Henry Shepherd's farm. When Norma married Willie, the couple moved into a small house on the Pageant's property. It is reported their marriage was rocky from the start. There were rumors around town that Willie would drink and sometimes become violent toward Norma. The couple separated after just 6 months of marriage. Norma moved back home with her parents, who also lived down the road from the Shepherds. July 17th, Norma and Willie attempted to reconcile. They bought a bottle of whiskey and went out drinking and dancing at a local hall. By daybreak, Norma turned up at a nearby cafe, claiming that 4 black men had beaten her husband and forced her into their car with a weapon. In 1951, the U.S. Supreme Court ordered a retrial after hearing the appeals of Samuel and Walter. With NAACP Legal Defense Fund Thurgood Marshall as their defense counsel, Charles opted out of joining the appeal, fearing a retrial could send him to the death chamber. This ruling outraged whites in Central Florida, who believed the court was too liberal and that the guilty parties might escape justice. In November 1951, Walter and Samuel were being transported from Rifeford State Prison in North Florida for a pretrial hearing in Lake County. Sheriff McCall and Deputy Yates were transporting the defendants late at night using back roads in order to avoid detection. The prisoners were in McCall's car. Yates was in a second vehicle about 2 miles ahead of McCall, supposedly scouting for trouble. According to later accounts given by the 2 officers, McCall noticed that his front tire was low on air. About this time, Walter asked to go relieve himself. McCall said he pulled to the side of the road to let Walter relieve himself and to check his tires. McCall related this version of the events as they got out. Samuel hit me with a flashlight that was laying on the seat. He told Walter to get my weapon. The lick had knocked me down. On one knee against the car. That is when I grabbed my weapon, a .38 S&W Special. I started firing and did not stop until I heard the plunger hitting empty shells. Walter survived the shooting and later told a different version of what happened. In his account, the sheriff pulled his car to the side of the road, ordered the men out, and shot them without provocation. He said Yates, having rushed to the scene, discovered that he was still alive and shot him in the throat. Walter was shot 3 times while he and Samuel were still handcuffed together. Unfortunately, Samuel Shepherd died at the scene. Harry Moore, a prominent civil rights activist and founder of the first NAACP branch in Florida, played a crucial role in organizing voter registration drives, fighting for equal pay, and investigating lynchings, contributing significantly to the early stages of the civil rights movement. Moore organized the campaign against the wrongful conviction of the defendants and demanded that Sheriff McCall be put on trial for murder. On Christmas night, 1951, a bomb went off below Moore's house, fatally wounding both him and his wife, Harriet. He died that same night, and his wife died 9 days later. The bombers were never caught. Yet, despite the FBI's forensic evidence of murder and attempted murder, a Lake County judge refused to investigate Sheriff McCall. Upon recovering from his injuries, Walter was put on trial in Marion County for the crimes against the Pageants. The governor attempted to resolve the case by asking the judge to give Walter a life sentence if he pleaded guilty. If the offer was refused, Thurgood Marshall would have to defend his client with the threat of the death penalty. When the offer was presented to Walter, he asked Marshall what he would have to do in order to accept the plea bargain. Marshall replied, "Just stand up there, and when they say, 'Are you guilty or not guilty?' you say, 'I'm guilty.'" Walter adamantly refused, spitting on the floor and asking, "Did I assault her? I didn't, and I'm not going to say I did." At that point, Marshall was convinced that his client was innocent. In his defense of Walter, Marshall called the witness who had found Norma wandering on the highway the morning after the alleged crime. He testified that the woman never told him she had been sexually assaulted, only that she had been kidnapped. The man testified that the woman told him it was too dark to identify the man who kidnapped her. Importantly, the defense was able to point out that there was no medical evidence verifying that a sexual assault had occurred. Marshall attacked the prosecution's effort to place Walter at the scene by submitting impressions of footprints in the mud that allegedly came from Walter's shoes. In order to debunk this assertion, Marshall had a criminologist testify that Walter was not wearing the shoes when the prints were made. The expert witness asserted that the prints had been made by empty shoes. The obvious inference was that someone had returned to the scene and imprinted the footprints using empty shoes. The verdict came in quickly. The jury sentenced Walter to the electric chair. And in November 1954, recently elected Governor Leroy Collins re-examined the case and commuted Walter's sentence to life in prison, saying, and I quote, "My conscience told me it was a bad case, badly handled, badly tried." His own investigation helped him conclude that the evidence did not clearly establish the Groveland boys' guilt. Collins was aided in his decision by a letter he'd received from the prosecutor, Jesse Hunter, a staunch segregationist, who informed the governor that he was no longer convinced that Walter had sexually assaulted Norma. 14 years later, in 1968, Walter Irvin was released from prison and moved to Miami. And in 1969, Walter returned to Groveland for a visit and died there of a heart attack during his visit. He was 39 years old. Charles Greenlee was released from prison in 1962 and settled in Nashville, Tennessee. He died April 18, 2012, at the age of 78. Norma stayed married to Willie Pageant through both the Groveland trials. In July 1952, Willie was arrested in Lake County and charged with contributing to the delinquency of a minor and sentenced to 5 months in jail. After a felony sexual assault charge in Orlando, he was in and out of jail on charges from fraud to vehicle theft to a sexual offense with another minor in Miami. The couple divorced in 1958, and Norma went on to remarry a few years later. By 1998, Willie had died, and so did Norma's second husband. According to Groveland City Councilman John Griffin, he said of the 66-year-old widow at the time, and I quote, "Before she died, Norma Pageant came to Walter Irvin's relatives and apologized for what had happened. Sometime later, Norma moved to Taylor County, Georgia, where she died July 12, 2024, at the age of 92. Sheriff McCall went on to run for re-election against Guy Bliss, former police officer from Detroit. McCall was shocked by the defeat. He retired to his home in Umatilla. Willis McCall died of a heart attack on April 29, 1994. And on November 22, 2021, the Groveland Four were posthumously exonerated. And that was the case of the Groveland Four. Down in the comments section, let us know whether or not you heard of this case. What were your thoughts? Let's talk about it. And thanks for watching. Bye for now.